what we do in a carbon literacy training, and I thought, well, I'll bring some of that training to everybody and we'll see if it can motivate us to take some action or some pledges. So while we're presenting this, have a good think about things that you might be able to do around what we discuss. It's also open, pop any comments that you have into the chat, but if there's something you want to talk about while we're there presenting, feel free to pop your hand up or wave, and we'll bring you in to ask any questions or make any comments. So you recognise here we've got a carbon footprint. This is the WWF carbon footprint calculator. Great one to go and use if you haven't used it before. They all give you slightly different results, which can be quite frustrating. This isn't mine, actually. This is an example. But it tells you how many tons of carbon or other emissions that you produce over a year. And it breaks it down into 4 categories. And you can see them here. We've got home, which is everything that happens within your house, all your energy. We've got stuff, that's everything you buy. We've got travel, that's how you get around. And we've got food. So those are the 4 areas that this carbon calculator look at. And they're a good way of breaking up your carbon footprint and the sort of impact that you might have while you're going about. So food is a key one, and you'll hear a lot of talk about food as we go on through the year, as we go on through with the conference of parties, and maybe throughout the environmental week as well. So I just thought I'm gonna use one of the games that we've got here. So we're gonna have a look at some of the food items. And I'm going to try and get everyone to pop into the chat, so we get the chat going a little bit, what they think might have the highest to lowest footprint per portion. So somebody clever at Manchester Metropolitan University, that's where this comes from, have put these together. And we've got the answers on the next slide as well. But I thought what we'll do is we'll blank off this slide. I'll get maybe Michelle, you can have a look at the comments and bring anything that's coming in, aggregate all of that for us as well. So we've got pork, we've got some tofu, we've got a portion of eggs, some lamb. I'm sorry if anyone hasn't had their tea yet. I'm making everyone super hungry with this maybe. Some chicken, we've got some beef, we've got some pulses, lentils, things like that. And we've got some fish. And it is important that it's farmed fish. We'll talk a little bit about that and why that is afterwards. So we're going to start with the highest. If you want to pop into the comments, you can always call it out as well if you like. Which do you think has the highest footprint per portion? What's coming through, Michelle? I can see the chat going up, but I can't see the chat.
Everybody's right so far. Everybody's saying beef, which
we've got an educated bunch.
The highest one, yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see those. We drill down, and yeah. So yeah, so that's the first one. I think we're probably ready to move on. If you want to.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'll just explain in the title there. We've got CO2e. And just as you are an educated bunch, and we're going to go through this in a minute, we're looking at all of the emissions, so not just carbon, we're looking at all of the emissions. That's what that sort of E means. And we'll talk about why that's important later. You're absolutely right. Portion of beef, 10 kilos of carbon associated with your portion of beef. You want to have a go at the next one?
So Wendy's just put in the chat, depends what it's fed on, which absolutely does make a difference. But still, even when it is fed, and we're going to look at that further on as well, I believe, in one of the slides. Even so, it's still up there among the highest footprints, as you'll see as we look in more detail. But great comment there, Wendy.
Thanks, Wendy. So are we going to have pop some guesses in the chat for the next one? Let's see the numbers going up again.
Yep. So we've got generally lamb or pork is what's coming up.
Sticking with animal products.
We've got somebody who's got some animals sitting on a fence, which creates an interesting picture when I saw that message. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, again,
ready for you to reveal, Pete.
I think I'll put you up here. Yeah, it's lamb. Lamb is the next. So these are the two ruminant animals, these are the two animals that emit methane as they live and as they grow. That comes in at 6 kilograms when we look at per portion. So next, who would like to have a quick guess? We'll go through these a bit quicker. Guess the next on the list, assuming some will go with pork again, because it was there before.
Put everyone out their misery.
Okay, well, actually, this might be the curveball. So it's fish, farmed fish per portion is next on that list. The reason that fish is here is because that it's farmed and because of the way that it's fed and the way that it's reared. Quite often, fish are fed on other fish that have to be caught and transported. And it's the same sort of impact that sort of mass farming, intensive farming has on the environment with fish. So next in the list, number 4, we've got eggs, chicken, pulses, tofu, and pork left. I'm just going to pop that in there because it's pork next. Quite close to that fish, and you can see now that we're really getting quite a reduction in those kilos per portion. So beef being 10 kilos per portion, coming down to that pork at 1.8. So next, which came first, is a bit of a clue maybe for this one. Got tofu, eggs, chicken, and pulses. I should pop that one in, and it's actually chicken that comes in next. Again, the way that it's fed, the way that it's reared, all have an impact as well. But looking at the portion that we've used here, and you can see the source, the data source, if you want to have a look at where exactly we got this from, but at 1.6 grams. So fish, pork, and chicken really sitting in quite a sort of similar bracket, I would say there. So after that, we've got eggs, tofu, or pulses.
We've got guesses. Tofu coming in. Any other guesses? Are we sticking with tofu? Seems to be the one that's coming up next. So a couple of people suggesting eggs.
It's going to be eggs, yeah, and it was out of the two. Eggs at that sort of half a kilo per portion. So you're not eating many eggs per portion. That would make quite a big difference in terms of this one as well. And so the very last two, well, we had lots of tofu before, which is right, but you can see it's 0.3 kilos. So you start to have a look at that next to some of the meat products. You can see that it really has a much lower impact when it comes to CO2e, which leaves us with those nuts and pulses. It's 0.2. So I think tofu, because of the way that it's shipped and the way that it's grown, is often thought of something that would be quite high impact. But soy is also fed to some of the animals, as we talked about some of the feed as well. So it's far more impactful when it's used in that way than it is when it's eaten directly. So well done. I think that's fantastic. Michelle, would you like to summarize that slide a bit?
Yeah, I just want to interject with there's something that's glaringly missing from these numbers. Has anybody got any idea what's missing out of all of these? What food group, what food type? Anyone want to either shout out and put it in there? Veg, dairy, absolutely. The answer is actually dairy. And so if we count beef as position 1 and pulses as position 8, where do you think you would put cheese? Just pop a number into the chat there. So somebody suggested that cheese is at the top there. Any other thoughts there? Yeah, 3, absolutely. So dairy is actually an absolutely massive impact, and people often think if they're moving away to a less impactful diet to eat more dairy and less meat, is actually it's within the context of the whole scenario is dairy has still got a massive impact. So yeah, so it's all about balance. I'm definitely a flexitarian. I'm not an advocate of telling people what they should and shouldn't eat. I do believe in eating less meat and less dairy, but just to know where the cheese and so on fits in. Yeah.
Fantastic, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, it's a really good point when you're thinking about food, and Yeah, and dairy is one that I think is overlooked. It's been a little bit in this slide from Manchester Met. So, I mean, in particular, I wanted to talk about that CO2e, and we won't go into this too much because it's a bit late for science. But just to make sure that you do see one part that plays its part, particularly with beef and lamb and other ruminant animals, is methane. And what I just want you to look at with methane, this is a greenhouse gas, as is carbon dioxide, which everyone talks about. But there's a little number at the bottom of there, which is 28. So methane is 28 times more impactful than carbon dioxide when it goes up into the atmosphere. It lives in the atmosphere for a far shorter amount of time, but because it's such a potent greenhouse gas, because it does so much heating when it's up there, it is one of the main gases that people are starting to talk about now. And animals, particularly sort of ruminants, the beef and the lamb, are the ones that people are getting really interested in. So reducing this amount of methane, because it's 28 times more impactful, is really key when we're talking about food. Again, I won't go into it in any depth, but you will see it, that it's really hit the news over the last maybe 6 weeks or so. I've seen a lot of press coverage around methane and reducing this. I know the US have made quite a big pledge around methane as well. But yeah, just to sum up a little bit around changing your diet, because we hear about it. And, you know, I suppose you may think, well, we all need to go vegan, or we all need to go vegetarian. We need to cut out all of the meat. That's not quite true. It's very much about personal choice while you eat. And I don't think anyone's going to get very far telling everyone to stop eating the foods that they want to eat. But what's important is that we just understand that we have this language where we can communicate around what different foods do. And you can see here, we've got a little chart that shows you the difference between high meat eaters, low meat eaters, all the way down to vegans. And what's interesting here is if you go from that high meat eating diet all the way down to vegan, you can save 1.6 tons a year. And that's significant. That can be around 10 to 15% of your whole carbon footprint for a year. But if you look at the bottom here, it's showing you the individual impacts of changing. And changing from high meat to medium meat is 0.6 tons per year, just over half a ton. So a huge amount of that 1.6, you know, over a third of it comes from just changing from being a high meat eater to a medium meat eater. And again, if you go down to that low meat eating, you take another 0.3 tons. So really, you don't need to, if this is something that you want to change, you don't need to go all the way down to vegan to make a change. You can just change that sort of high meat dependency, or if you're medium, maybe going to low, sort of balancing out that diet a little bit to make as much of an impact as you possibly can. So we don't all need to go vegan. Flexitarian is quite a good way, can be a very good way of reducing that impact very, very quickly. And yeah, we had the comment earlier about what you feed your food has a big impact, but also where does it come from? How do you source it? And yeah, an interesting thing to look at here is a chocolate bar from a deforested rainforest can be worse than a serving of low impact beef. So low impact beef might come from the UK, might come locally to you, and might be reared in a less intensive way in terms of emissions. So we don't just think about the foods that we eat. It's very important to think about where your food comes from, how it's traveled. However, having said that, you can see that the tofu, the beans and the nuts, they're always going to be the lowest impact in terms of emissions foods to eat. So putting plenty of those into your diet is really good for you, really healthy for you. But yeah, we do need to think a little bit deeper about what we eat and where things come from as well. And I put this in as well, Michelle, to keep you happy. I preempted that we should talk about dairy and we should talk about milk because it is missing from the list. This is from the BBC. Same data that we actually used before around which milk I should choose. And I know there's a lot of debate around alternative milks and which you might use, but we can see that dairy milk in particular, and we can also talk about cheese and other dairy products as well, has the biggest impact by far out of all of the different types of milk. So again, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to give it up, but thinking about where you use it, do you use it for cereal every day? Do you use it in sort of big milky coffees, or can you swap that out and have a big impact on emissions? And we've got water in there as well, which is a big part of food, but could be a really interesting thing to pick up on with the presentation tomorrow around water. So with all of that, I think definitely my mum's favourite part in talking about food, and a lot of people talk about food, is food waste. So it's not just where it comes from, it's not just what it is, it's not just how it was grown, it's the fact that we waste huge amounts of our food. And if food loss were a country, it would be the third biggest emitter in the world. And I think that's startling as fact, particularly when a lot of people globally go hungry as well. So being able to waste less food, being able to use what you buy, or buy what you're going to use, or a combination of both of those things, and making sure that we get that down as much as we possibly can. A lot of this food waste happens in the wealthier countries. The UK is a big contributor to this. So it's something that we can do at home, we can do within our own households, to making sure that we don't buy the big jars of something and then have it go. And definitely maybe going back to smelling things and getting in touch with our food. If it's gone out of its sell by date, but it still looks good to eat, learning a little bit about what we can and we can't play with when it comes to food. We seem to have lost that a little bit, in my opinion. I don't know, Michelle, with food waste, and if you've got anything more to sort of bring in that with your expertise.
It's just an absolutely massive issue, and 70% of food waste in the UK happens in the domestic kitchen. So it's just having better behaviours, like thinking about rotating your vegetables, so that people have a perception that only meat and fish and high protein is impactful on waste, but actually even those lettuce leaves and so on, they're all impactful on waste. And when they go into the bin, they produce methane, which, as Pete's already shown us, is 28 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So yeah, so just good habits, like looking in your fridge and planning your meals around what you've got, and rotating, so that you don't end up with like that horrible limp lettuce at the back of the fridge that's gone brown. You eat it before it gets like that.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a big issue, and definitely something that we can do within our own households. We can have a huge impact. I worked at a charity that reclaims food that supermarkets put out to waste, thinking that would be a big place, but that they waste very, very little. I think so less than 1% actually of supermarket produce goes to waste. Most of it happens in the home or happens in the production before it gets to the supermarket. They make sure that their figures are very, very low. So it is definitely something that we could do as individuals in our own homes, in our own time, to tackle the emissions that you can see there. And here's one that's really ballooned over the last sort of 18 months. One of the things around the lockdowns and the fact that we haven't been able to go out, that people have turned to their own gardens, allotments, and growing your own food. And I think in terms of the data that's out there around this, and it would be quite nice to move away from data, there's not a huge amount, but I know that by getting in touch with seasonality, when things grow, being outside, picking up the food that's growing at the time, bringing it in, tasting the difference between food that can be grown close to you and near where you are, I think it's a really important something you can definitely do in terms of your ideas going forward. And when it comes to allotments, we've got a picture up there. It's also about joining a community of people and talking about food, bringing that all together. So it's not just growing your own food, and we've only got so much capacity, which is why this might not be in terms of the most impactful thing that you can do in terms of your emissions, but it's something that really gets us into our food, understanding where it comes from, understanding the collaborative part of growing as well. And it's fun. I think a lot of people have had some extra time to be able to go out in the garden, maybe dig a patch. We did it. We dug an extra patch in our garden right at the beginning of last year, and can be a really rewarding thing to be able to do as well. So through that list, we've gone through some of what we do in terms of carbon literacy and food, and that part of your impact, that part of your overall carbon footprint. And I hope we've given you a couple of ideas. So in the next slide, we've got some of the things that you can look at doing. So sourcing your food, eating in season, making sure that the food that you buy is in season, growing right now, hasn't had to be imported or hasn't had to be grown in an intensive way in the UK. You've got to be careful of produce that you can buy that's in the UK but shouldn't be growing at that time of year. It may well have been grown using a hothouse, and the heating and the energy that's taken in growing that can be hugely impactful. We looked at some of the changes that we can make within our diets, and the reason why we might make some of those changes with dairy, meat products. Growing your own is something here, and eat what I buy or buy what I eat. So what we're going to call on everyone to do now is just have a think and pop into the chat any sort of pledges, any ideas, anything that after seeing those handful of slides and being given a few minutes that you might do tomorrow, any change that you might make tomorrow around food, around how you buy food, your relationship with food, how you waste or don't waste food, and pop them into the chat. We'll get a little opportunity as well to talk about what those pledges might be. We hopefully get a short amount of time in some breakout rooms to discuss those as well, because with Speak Carbon, with carbon literacy, we're really interested in action. So using a little bit of information, a little bit of knowledge, and going out, being able to do something. So I was really keen to try and bring that part of it in tonight. So while we do that, Paul, I was hoping we could get some questions, this sort of Q&A session in now.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that, Pete. That's brilliant. Given us a lot to think about. So some really good sharing and ideas, and kind of swapsies going on in chat as well, with people sharing their own little tips on tofu and chocolate and goodness knows what else. So maybe to go in reverse order here. At some of the questions, there's some really nice pledges coming through as well. Plant-based milks, any that made abroad, do we know? That's from Peter, or
I think Oatly is made in the UK. In fact, I think it might even be made in Scotland. No, it's I beg your pardon. It says it's in Sweden. I'm just looking it up online. There are some that are made, but I don't know off the top